before agriculture. Before writing, before the first city walls rose from the earth, there was fermentation, a chemical accident older than humanity itself. And somewhere, in a moment lost to time, an early human tasted it and didn't stop. This is the story of how that accident became civilization's oldest companion. Long before humans existed, wild yeast was already at work. Airborne and opportunistic, it settled on fallen fruit, feeding on sugar and releasing alcohol as its waste product. Some researchers believe our early primate ancestors developed a taste and a tolerance for this fermented fruit, drawn to its smell, its calories, its subtle intoxicating pull. It's known as the drunken monkey hypothesis, the theory that our attraction to alcohol didn't begin with humans at all. It began in the trees. In the Yellow River Valley, in a village called Jiahu, archaeologists found something remarkable: residue in broken pottery, chemically confirmed as the oldest alcoholic beverage known to science. A mixture of rice, honey, and hawthorn fruit, fermented 9,000 years ago, before the wheel, before writing. Someone in Jiahu had already learned to brew. In the valleys of the South Caucasus, modern-day Georgia, early farmers buried massive clay vessels called kvevri beneath their homes. Inside, grape residue tells a story of deliberate winemaking, one of the earliest in human history. The land itself seemed to invite it. Wild grapevines growing thick across the hillsides, waiting to be picked. In the Zagros Mountains, archaeologists uncovered a jar sealed with pine resin, likely added to preserve the wine inside, or perhaps to mask its taste. It remains one of the oldest wine finds ever discovered in the Near East. Even then, humans were refining their craft. In Mesopotamia, the birthplace of writing, another invention was quietly taking shape. Sumerians baked bread from barley, then submerged it in water, allowing wild yeast to transform it into a thick, nourishing, mildly alcoholic porridge. It wasn't refined, it wasn't elegant, but it may have been one of humanity's first reliable sources of both calories and comfort. By 4000 BCE, drinking had become communal. Cuneiform tablets depict groups gathered around a single large vessel, sipping through long reed straws. A practical solution for a drink thick with floating grain husks. Beer wasn't just sustenance, it was a shared experience, etched permanently into the world's earliest written records. The Sumerians even wrote a hymn to their goddess of beer, Ninkasi. Structured almost like a recipe, it described the brewing process step by step, sung aloud as both prayer and an instruction manual. In Sumer, brewing wasn't just a craft, it was sacred knowledge worthy of poetry. In the tomb of a scorpion king at Abydos, archaeologists uncovered hundreds of wine jars imported from the Levant, hundreds of miles away. Wine, in early Egypt, was not for everyone. It was a symbol of power, wealth, and status, meant to accompany the elite even into the afterlife. But beer belonged to everyone. The laborers who built Egypt's pyramids were paid in part in beer, a thick, nutritious ration that fueled the construction of some of the ancient world's greatest monuments. It wasn't a luxury, it was survival. Far to the east, in the cities of the Indus Valley civilization, pottery residues reveal fermented beverages made from rice, fruit, and grain. Across 3 separate corners of the ancient world, China, the Near East, and South Asia, humans were independently arriving at the same discovery. In the forests of northern Europe, hunter-gatherers stumbled onto a simpler formula: wild honey, rainwater, and thyme. Left inside a hollowed log, the mixture fermented naturally into what historians call wild mead, one of humanity's oldest and most accidental alcoholic drinks. As fermentation spread, so did its meaning. In many early societies, alcohol wasn't consumed casually, it was consumed together, in ceremony. A single bowl passed from hand to hand, uniting a community in ritual. To drink was to belong. High in the Andes, early South American societies discovered that human saliva could kickstart fermentation. Maize was chewed, then spat into vessels, where enzyme maize broke down starches into fermentable sugar. The result, chicha, a drink still made in parts of South America today. In Mesoamerica, ancestors of the Aztecs learned to tap the agave plant for its sweet sap, fermenting it into a milky, mildly alcoholic drink called pulque. It was sacred, tied to Jiahu, goddess of the agave, and reserved for ritual and celebration. In Bronze Age China, The Shang dynasty elevated fermented millet wine into high art. Elaborate bronze vessels, cast with intricate designs, were used not for personal enjoyment, but for solemn offerings to ancestors, a bridge between the living and the dead. On the islands of the Aegean, early Bronze Age societies were already gathering for feasts centered on wine, a tradition that would echo centuries later in the famous Greek symposium. Even before Athens, before philosophy, the cup was already being raised. Across the Levant, ancient wine presses carved directly into bedrock still survive today. Grapes were crushed by foot, their juice channeled into collection basins below, a method so effective it would remain largely unchanged for thousands of years. In Scandinavia, chemical analysis of burial urns has revealed something unexpected: a complex fermented drink combining honey, grain, and cranberries. A Nordic grog buried alongside the dead, perhaps meant to accompany them into whatever came next. As trade networks expanded, so did wine's reach. Phoenician ships carried amphorae across the Mediterranean, introducing viticulture to new shores and new peoples. Alcohol was no longer bound to the place it was made, it had become a traveller. And somewhere in this long unfolding story, something shifted. Humans stopped merely finding fermented fruit and started growing it. Grain was no longer just gathered, but planted, tended, and harvested for the express purpose of brewing. Some historians argue this shift was not incidental to the rise of agriculture, but one of its driving forces. From a rotting piece of fruit on a forest floor, to sacred hymns sung to a beer goddess, to bronze vessels honoring the dead, alcohol has never simply been a drink. It has been currency, medicine, ritual, and religion. It fueled the builders of pyramids and the poets of Sumer alike. 10,000 years later, the glass in your hand still carries that same ancient spark. The moment humans first tasted the accident of fermentation and decided, deliberately, to make it again.